Well, I'm Zach Klein. I'm the Columbus City Attorney, Columbus, Ohio, and I get the distinct honor of introducing a really good friend of mine, Congressman Tim Ryan from Ohio. So I've known Tim for about 15 years now, starting back in the early days of the Obama presidency when I had the fortune of working in the White House in 2009. Tim and his office took me under their wing and adopted me as part of the Tim Ryan family and invited me to a lot of office functions, not knowing a lot of folks in D.C. So I got to know Tim and his team really well, and it always meant a lot to me from that point forward of having the opportunity to spend time with Tim and get to know Tim as the person that he is. And over the past 15 or so years that I've watched him be a fighter and a champion in the U.S. Congress, and then of course last year over the past 18 months, in one of the hardest fought, best run Senate campaigns in the entire United States when he took on J.D. Vance right here in Ohio. I've always admired Tim for being authentic, for always keeping his true self and his North Star front and center in every decision that he's made. And he ran his campaign that way in a lot of ways of what Lene was talking about, of being honest and being pro-worker, but also pro-business, and understanding that both those things can exist at the same time, which is really the heart of the New Deal and what we talked about, progressive and pro-growth policies. Tim put that front and center for a national conversation and actually took on the Democratic Party on a lot of issues and wasn't afraid to do so where he thought in his own personal belief that the party was wrong, no matter which way the wind was blowing in the Democratic base. Republicans were scared to death of Tim. If you don't know, Mitch McConnell had to go find $50 million and put it against Tim Ryan in Ohio in order to prop up J.D. Vance. That's $50 million less dollars to Blake Masters, to Dr. Oz, to Adam Laxalt. So while Tim may not have won his Senate race, the Senate majority is because of Tim Ryan. And if you ever get a chance to Google one video from, I just want you to Google this one thing. Google Tim's concession speech on election night if you haven't seen it. It is a masterclass in class and what it means to take defeat, no matter how hard the battle is, and to look an election denier in the face and say, you know what? I lost, you won. This is how our country works. We move on. We don't spread lies. We don't spread misinformation. We tell the truth to our voters and to the American people. That takes some freaking guts. And Tim did that because it's the right thing to do. So I want to give Tim, welcome to the stage, and my friend Matt Bennett from the Third Way, who's been a fighter alongside all of us in the New Deal, who needs no introduction. But my friend Tim Ryan and my friend Matt Bennett. Appreciate you, man.
They really like you, Matt.
Yeah. Look, I want to start by offering condolences on a really tough loss to a hated opponent. I mean, of course, the Michigan-Ohio State game. We got to start with a question that cropped up earlier around Florida. And the great Mary Landrieu is here. This happened in Louisiana. It's now happening in Ohio. What is happening? What is the matter with Ohio? Why is it that someone like you, who ran basically a perfect Senate race, really had no hope in a state that's trended so hard to the right?
I would say I would kind of disagree with the premise a little bit. Like, I think if we had probably $10 million of ground game, we didn't get any help from the Senate Majority PAC. And I think if we would have had $10 million, our problem was we couldn't get the turnout that we needed. We were basically carrying our positive message. Turn a little bit so I can see everybody. Our positive message, our contrast message, and our ground game. And we just, at the end, in fact, my campaign manager ran into J.D. Vance's campaign manager the other day, and they said we were up in the polls until 2.5 weeks out. And we just could not continued to sustain it without any help from the outside. Unions were there for us. But I'll just say this. So I think we could have won. But I think it's important for us to recognize, like, the Democratic brand is really bad in a lot of areas. And I'll give you 2 examples of this. I'll give you one in Ohio. Jen Bruner ran for Supreme Court. And Zach, we're all friends with Jen. Great candidate. She ran 2 years ago for Supreme Court Justice, and she won. And in Ohio at that point, you didn't have to affiliate. You didn't have to be a Democrat or Republican. You just ran on your name. So in Marion, Ohio, she got 51% 2 years ago. This year, she turned around and ran for Supreme Court Justice. Same woman, same message, same bench, but they changed the law where you had to affiliate, so she had a D by her name, 31%. That's one example. And I use this, too, with Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly's a vet, like fighter pilot, astronaut. By all accounts, I'm sure you're a good husband. I'm a good husband. Probably a lot of good husbands in this room. Mark Kelly is like America's husband, right? He's like the greatest husband in America. Like, if he didn't have a D by his name, this guy wins 75% of the vote. But he barely beats a fascist in Arizona. So, like, I just kind of disagree a little bit with the worldview here of, like, this was a great election for Democrats. It's like we barely beat the insane people. Like, people were going to the ballot box and going, do I vote for the fascist or the Democrat? Just think about that. And so I think this is why I'm here. That's why I love you guys, is that we've got to rehabilitate this, not for the Democrats, but for America. We've got to figure this out.
Right, and it's someone who is not America's husband, Herschel Walker, is on the ballot. We'll see, but he's still in that race, which is pretty unbelievable. We've talked this morning quite a bit. Lene ran us through the numbers of how badly we were doing, and you talked in some specifics about what was going on in some of these races. Why? When you went out and we were talking to people, you know, at factory gates and in diners, what are you hearing about the Democratic brand? What is the problem?
There's just I think a lack there, and it's penetrated like the psyche of the country at this point, and I don't know how you rehabilitate it. I don't have that answer. We all have to sit down and try to figure it out. You can do it kind of candidate by candidate, but like brand-wise, I'm not sure what we do. It's a lack of connection to the concerns that people are going through every single day. And I just think, honestly, like me and my wife talk about this all the time. It's like, and we come from the Youngstown area, used to be hardcore Democrat for generations. And it's like, oh, you're a Democrat? Like, that's like, you're like out of the mainstream. And like, you don't care about us. You look down upon us. You don't have a focus on what we're going through every single day. And that's why we work so hard during the campaign to go to these places, because you start breaking that down by showing up. That's the first basic step, not to be afraid. That's why I went on did the Fox News town hall. Like, you can't be afraid to go on Fox News. Like, that's where people are. That's where they live. So you go there and you make your case. And even though they're going to be harassing you and shit, like, this guy, I don't know if you guys saw the Fox News town hall, but there was this guy sitting behind me. And he was, like, trying to harass me. And I'm like, what are we doing? Like, we're on live TV, bro. Like, calm down. I'm going to kick your ass, you know what I mean? Like, no. But it's like,
yes.
Actually, it did cross my mind. When's the next commercial break? I'm going to go kick this guy's ass. I'll be right back. I probably won your election if I did that, though. Like, how do Democrats win? You go beat the shit out of some guy and then come back. But you have to go on. You have to go to these places, and you have to go on TV and begin to break that down, because they don't think you care. And so if they don't think you care and then you don't show up, then you are just affirming their view that you don't care because you don't even take the time to show up. The second part, and a very important part, is laser focus on their pocketbook. Laser focus on their pocketbook. And I think as we've seen the union membership diminish, those workers who used to rely on their union leaders to tell them who to vote for, who was best for their pocketbook, are now relying on their bosses and the owners of the companies to tell them who to vote for. And so, you know, it's got to be a pro-growth, progressive economic agenda and just laser-like focus, because the minute you get off that is the minute they think you don't care about them because you're not talking about what's on their mind. And so, not to get too far afield here, but I think it's an important point. People may even disagree with you on pro-choice, pro-life, or pro-death penalty, or immigration, or any of those issues. But if their first 5 issues in their mind, them and their spouse's mind, is mortgage, car payment, bills, health care, prescription drugs, and just cost of living, if that's number 1 through 6, and you show up and you're talking about a woman's right to choose, they're going to look at you like you're insane. They're like, and they may agree with you 100%. Like, of course the government shouldn't be in this business. Of course, of course, of course, of course. I don't have the luxury of thinking about that right now. And that's where, like, people in Washington got to get out of this mindset that, like, no. Like, yeah, they agree with you, but who cares? Because they're worried about paying their bills, and if you come in with that agenda, they're not going to vote for you. They're just not, because they think you don't care about them.
You know, you noted that some of the victories we had were against people who are just outright fascists. And I think the Republicans kind of now break down into largely into two groups. There's the people who are crazy and fascist, and there's the people who are pretending to be. And your opponent, the Beverly Hillbilly, was pretending to be. And what advice do you have for people in this room who may have similar kinds of opponents going forward against the MAGA movement? Is there a way of winning that debate that Lene talked about and making sure that people understand that they're the extremists and we're the mainstream? Is that doable against people like J.D. Vance?
You have to press them at every turn. You know, like, I'm a old quarterback, so it's like the best defense is a good offense, and you just press. But like, we wouldn't let J.D. Vance breathe. Like, he went to a farm to visit. Guys cooking pork on this huge grill, sweating, you know, and he says, "JD, you want a pork sandwich?" He says, "Nah, I gotta watch my weight on the campaign trail." So I pounded him on social media. I'm like, "This dude won't even eat a pork sandwich at a farm in Ohio. Like, he ain't Ohio, you know." Like, it was like, didn't matter. Like, just don't let them breathe, because if they're phony, you just keep building that case. And I think we built that case against J.D. Vance. Like, our case wasn't, we had more split tickets in Ohio than we've seen in a long time. So we were able to pull a lot of Republicans, and we had Republicans for Accountability were in, did some great work. John Bridgeland was former Rob Portman's chief of staff, was kind of spearheading that for us. We had a lot of crossover. So that started to work, because it was like, this guy's, it became like this thing. It was like this. It's almost out of Sopranos. This guy. It's like, this guy, you know. So everything he did. So you have to press them on every issue, on every, like there's these cultural moments. You have to press them on all those, because those will be most revealing. And then right back on the economic stuff.
You know, Zach referenced your concession speech, which was phenomenal. But one other thing I would encourage folks in this room to do is watch a couple of the clips of you on television, because you had an ability to take what you had done in Congress and what Biden had done and put it in a context that really brought it alive for people in Ohio. Why is this going to matter to them and their communities? We saw Secretary Buttigieg this morning. We're going to see Mitch Landrieu next, talking about the extraordinary accomplishments and now the challenge that is shared by everyone in this room of not only making sure that that money is spent well, but that people understand that Democrats did that and why it's good for them. Can you talk a little bit about how you did that?
Yeah, it wasn't about defending the party. Like, we wanted to stay out of that discussion altogether because we weren't going to win that. It was about we passed the rescue package, and it saved the pensions for 100,000 workers in Ohio who were going to lose their pension, get cut in half to 2/3. Those were Teamsters who probably voted for Trump, like 75% of them. When you look at what we passed most recently with the Inflation Reduction Act, we saw in Ohio a stream of investments that came from the moment that happened. Honda announced a $4 billion battery plant that they're going to put in to Ohio. We did the CHIPS Act, and that led to Intel coming to Columbus, Ohio, and Zach, was in the middle of all of this too. Where it's going to be like $100 billion investment, 7,000 union construction jobs to build it, and 5,000 union construction jobs for the next 10 years. The average wage at Intel is going to be $135,000 a year. Like, that's what we're talking about, and that happened because we passed the CHIPS Act. What we're doing in Youngstown, we had an old General Motors facility. Factory was empty. Foxconn bought it and put a bunch of money into it. They're making it their North American electric vehicle hub, and there's like 5 products they're already building there. There's like 3 cars, a truck, all electric, and a tractor for farming. And so this is what's happened, and a bunch of natural gas stuff is happening in eastern Ohio as well, power plants and great opportunities there. So this is what's happening. Solar panels in Toledo, we've got 2 companies there, all because of what we've done. So that's the message, is like these investments are leading to jobs, and we've got to make sure that those jobs are good paying jobs, and not just the fossil fuel jobs, but the new jobs are paying as much, if not more, than the old jobs. The new jobs are paying more than the old jobs.
One of the things I think that you did best was, when it comes to this spending, and the IRA obviously has a ton of money to fight climate change, and I think every single person in this room would stipulate that that is incredibly important. But to your point earlier, most people wake up in the morning and are not thinking about the climate crisis. They're thinking about their own budget crisis. So how do Democrats in tough places square that circle? It's easy if your constituents all agree on climate. But if they don't, how do you talk about what Democrats are doing so that it doesn't sound like we're a bunch of freaks?
The jobs piece. I mean, I rarely would talk about climate, and I even among like college kids, and talk about building electric vehicles. Building electric trucks, building solar panels, using natural gas and hydrogen, and eventually, other forms of clean energy. Like, build this, build that, build the supply chain, build the chips, build, manufacture. And one of the kids at one of the events said, so what's your climate policy? And I said, that is my climate policy. We're going to build shit. We're going to build the new economy that is going to bend the curve on carbon and climate. And we're going to do it by building. Now, the fact that, I could give that speech in a union hall, or I could give it at a college campus, and the kid was like, oh, yeah. It's like, well, I just think, and I think actually the president does a decent job of talking about climate in the way of jobs. I think that's really important. The infrastructure that we have to build out, the $7 or $8 billion that's in, and I'm sure Mitch will go through all this with the infrastructure package for charging stations. Like, these are all union construction workers that are going to be building this stuff. And so that's why I think, like, we lead with the jobs, lead with the unions. There's a renaissance with unions in the country. I think they're like 64% approval. Absolutely unheard of since in the 20 years I've been in Congress. It was like me and Sherrod Brown and Ted Strickland and like a few others were like pro-union in Ohio, Marcy Kaptur. And like we were in a caucus, we could caucus in a phone booth, like the pro-union people. And that, like, if you were against the trade agreements because you thought they were going to empty out factories in Ohio, you were like, you weren't an intellectual. You weren't smart. And that has completely shifted. And so I think we need to lead with those unions that are going to benefit from those jobs, because those are the rank and file guys that we lost over the years because they thought we were going to take their jobs.
One last question on this, just to kind of press the point, which is you have just laid out a very, very compelling case for why Democrats are making life better in places like Youngstown. And you also started by saying those people do not buy it at all. So what's it going to take to bridge that gap? I mean, we have a record to run on. You ran on it as effectively as I think can be done. What more do we need to do to kind of get across that divide?
I don't know, honestly. Like, I think it's got to be a real sustained effort with all of the different groups. You know, I talked to Liz Schuler about this during the campaign, about the AFL-CIO really having kind of a long-term strategy on communicating to the rank and file members about, you know, and not talking about Democrat or Republican, talking about issues, straight issues, and talk about issues for a year and a half, and then you do the candidates. Okay, after all these issues that we've talked about, who's on your side of these two candidates? And so doing that work now in the off year, and I just think that may be the only way to do it. You know, we need to engage the young kids, you know, and find what issues are really important to them. I know climate is, I know marijuana is. Some things never change, but like find what those issues are, and really start trying to rebuild. I just want to be very, very clear. Like, I don't agree with the worldview that the Democrats had a great election. Like, I'm sorry, it's not sour grapes on my part. I'm just saying, the Mark Kelly example. It's like, should have been a blowout. Should have been a blowout. Jen Brunner, like, this is a great candidate. So we've got a lot of rehabilitating to do. And like, if we're not going to have an honest conversation with ourselves about it, we're going to be in the same boat in 2 years, you know, and the fascists are beating down the door again. We're like, I thought we put this to bed. And it's like, no. Like, we've got to figure this out, and it's going to be a bunch of, like, really honest conversations that we all need to have. And they're tough to have.
Apparently you are not on Simon Rosenberg's Twitter feed. Look, what Zach said about the fact that you so massively overperformed everyone's expectations, and it drove a ton of money into Ohio against you. It not only helped Senate candidates, but it helped lots of people here. So I want to make sure to give folks here the opportunity to ask questions and make comments to you. So if anybody has a question, go ahead and raise your hand. Yes, sir.
I'd love to hear what you heard about small business on the campaign trail. I think it's absolutely missing from the Democratic platform. Even today, I haven't heard it brought up once. I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
I think a lot of small business people, it's kind of the same kind of mindset. It's like they don't hear us talking about them. And so I was including small business, and I kept talking about a tax cut. Like, what's the solution to the inflation? I said, we got to give workers a tax cut. We got to give small businesses a tax cut. And I know we'll get in a big fight with the economists about inflation and all that stuff. But I thought that was the best, quickest way to, like, help people in small business. I would always include that in there. I think when you look at the consolidation over the years, you look at the fight against big, the antitrust issues that Amy Klobuchar wrote about in her book, I think are really profound. And it's tech, it's ag, it's, you know, we used to have 10, 11 seed manufacturers or seed producers in the country. Now it's like 3 or 4. Same with fertilizer. It's a great issue for us to go into rural America and talk about those things. But those small businesses, because we don't talk about them, they just default to the people who think they're going to, like, not raise their taxes. So I would agree with you. I'd be happy to, like, continue that conversation on how we include that in into the agenda, because I think it's important. Like if you go to Youngstown, Ohio 25 years ago, half the business people in Youngstown, Ohio, maybe more, were all Democrats. And now they're all Republican, you know, and I think it's more like omission than a commission.
Yeah, Jack.
So, Tim, I want to get your take on this about Ohio, because the previous panels have talked about the competitiveness of Florida, the competitiveness of North Carolina. What are the red states and what are the purple states? So my theory of the case is, and I welcome your comments on it, you mentioned Intel, you mentioned Honda. What's, I think, not told about that is that the growth projections for Central Ohio over the next 10 years is about 1 million people coming to Central Ohio in the next 10 years. 1 million. Those are college-educated Intel workers, Honda battery workers. So yeah, Ohio may be red right now, but the medium and long-term perspective for Ohio, in my opinion, is we're going to be back in purple status, the same way that Arizona was red, is now in purple status. I'd love to have your comments on that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I still think we're a purple state. I mean, you call me like stubborn Irish guy, you know, but I just like, I think we're still a purple state. I think you take Sherrod Brown 2 years in a presidential election where the Schumer doctrine is take care of incumbents, which, you know, can't be mad at him for it. Schumer's going to put a bunch of money in Ohio. There won't be a turnout issue. Sherrod will have some crossover appeal. These investments will have come online, the infrastructure bill, the Intel, the this. Sherrod Brown's going to win. I think Sherrod Brown wins Ohio, which makes it frustrating when you can have a similar candidate do something similar and not get the investment and lose. It was like a missed opportunity. So I think Ohio is a purple state, and I think it's a moderate state with the proper investments, and I think Sherrod's going to win. So I think you're right, and I think it will continue to trend that way. You still have to go into the rural areas. You still can't get trounced 80-20 in some of these counties. Just not going to work. The math doesn't add up, and you got to get your voters out. But I think Ohio's a purple state, and I think it will. I think it will continue to be, and it may trend. It may trend blue, and once all these things get online.
Any final questions? Yes, sir.
So I was actually just talking to Katie about this. I'm from rural Indiana, and it seems like us rural voters just we're 80-20 Republican. There's sometimes it feels like there's nothing we can do about it. My first job was as an organizer in rural turf. So what do you think? Is there any way to stop the inexorable hemorrhaging of rural voters from the Democratic Party? How does somebody appeal to rural voters in Ohio?
Great question. First off, you get the Best Dressed Award today. I just want to let you know.
Thank you.
Absolutely, 1,000%. 1,000%.
Yes, I'm blushing.
That's a great question. You got to show up. You got to go there. You got to do the factory tours. You got to tour the ethanol plants. You got to go to the farms. And then you got to have, I think, 2 or 3 like really key penetrating issues that are going to get people to go, I like what this guy's saying, or I like what this woman's saying. And I think you can't go in there and say, we're for broadband in rural wherever. Like, no shit. Okay. So is everybody. I think the antitrust thing. I think the antitrust thing in rural areas, like we gotta hone that message. We gotta put that at the tip of the spear, and you go. We all should be, as Democrats, hitting antitrust, hitting consolidation. Farmers are getting screwed. Prices are going up, and we want to do something about it. And we're going to bust the bad guys. Like, we're going to bust them. We're going to put them in jail. They're wrong. Like Teddy Roosevelt. Let's go. And I think if you go in there with that, because that is not just a policy issue, which is like a whole thing about Democrats. Like, I still go back. It's like been 50 years, and like Jimmy Carter's guy has the best line. One of Jimmy Carter's guys says, Democrats show up to a gunfight with a 10-point policy plan. So while this is a policy, of antitrust and what we're going to do. And I think Cory Booker has and Amy, they're working on like some cool stuff. But it's like you can feel it. Like if you go into rural area and say, we're going to bust these guys, they're screwing you. This is the problem. It's an energy that you are bringing to rural America, not like, we're for broadband, and we know you maybe need some clean water here, and we want to help with that. It's like, no, we're going to bust the bad guys. We're going to bust the bad guys. And that's where Democrats get into trouble. We're perceived as being weak, and then we affirm that stuff. Go in there, and we should talk about this. Like, what are we going to do? We should talk about how we have a hardcore, robust antitrust agenda for rural America. And let's go. Play offense.
One more question.
I'm curious how you break through the Republican propaganda bubble in a state like Ohio. I was actually on the ground in Ohio running around doing a lot of local earned media work. And obviously these local papers are emaciated right now. And there's Fox News that you're up against. And obviously you go on Fox News. But I'm curious what more work needs to be done, what you'd like to see when it comes to Democrats breaking through in places like Ohio.
Yeah, local news is key. You know, we did for 18 months, we just did the circuit in Ohio, you know, in Lima, in Portsmouth, and trying to hit the local papers as much as we can. And I think that's why we got the crossover. Again, like, I think our strategy worked, other than, like, getting the base to turn out in an off-year election without the resources to do that. But I think when you look at the split ticket, like, DeWine won by 26 points. Like, our gubernatorial candidate lost by 26 points. Like, it's unheard of. Like, even in Wisconsin, where Barnes lost by 1 point, like, his governor won, right? Which is great. But it's hard to, like, sustain that. But, like, our strategy of getting Republicans to cross over for us and independents to cross over for us worked. And that was largely through, and all the data bears this out from the 2020 election, is that they were called the Trump persuadable voters. Trump persuadable voters get majority of their news from local news sources. And so, like, if I called my mom right now, or if I walked into my mom's condo in Niles, Ohio, right now, she would be sitting on her couch, and she would have the Youngstown Vindicator and the Warren Tribune sitting on the couch right next to her. And she would either have on TV local Youngstown Channel 21, or like the what's the one network that shows like Christmas movies in July, Hallmark Channel. Yeah, she'd have that on. I walked into my mom's condo in like June, and I walked in to like I'd get her a cup of coffee or something. I'll bring it over to her, and I'm like, walk in, and my mom's crying. I'm like, Mom, are you okay? She goes, yeah, I'm fine. I said, what's going on? She says, oh, the boy moved back from New York and got married to the girl. And I'm like, what are you doing? And I looked up, and it had the holly berries on the corner of the thing. I'm like, it's June. What are we doing? So it's either that or the local channel. So she gets her news locally, you know? So you get in the local news ecosystem and then advertise on the Hallmark Channel. You'll be good.
It's December, so it's getting real in your mom's condo right now.
Yeah, I better call and check on her.
Exactly.
See how she's doing. She's probably a wreck right now.
So, Tim Ryan, it was not your ambition to be the most heartbreaking campaign of all in this cycle, but I will say on behalf of everyone in this room and everyone I know that we can't wait to see what you do next. We hope you go again, and thank you for everything you've done.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.